Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand located in Northeast Ohio. And here in the little studio, as always, joining us all the way on the far side of the table, Chef Tony Biggs. How you doing, sir?
Hey, how are you today?
Glorious. Yourself?
I'm fantastic.
Nice. And of course, meat scientist Diana Clark. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic.
Great
Wearing her Chicago Meatheads
I know.
certified Angus beef hat as well.
I keep the brim flat, by the way. It's got to be flat in Chicago.
But we pride ourselves not just on understanding what trends are, but really trying to be out in front of what's hip, what's trendy, right? I like to think that Tony Biggs probably sets some trends. You know what? He's doing things years before you see him pop in other places. And a big trend, and I remember reading this back in early 2020 when, of course, everybody comes out with their different food guides, like what's hip, what should you be aware of. And one of the things they talked about was this thing called Biltong, right? Which is it's a dried meat product, right? So let me tell you how trendy we are, right? Because on staff, and now actually standing wedged in between Chef Tony and Diana Clark, is Chef Peter Rosenberg, who is a chef here at Certified Angus Beef. But understand, Peter comes to us all the way from a small country in Africa that was called Rhodesia. Today it's called Zimbabwe. In 2020, the food and wines of the world are talking about how hip Biltong is. Biltong comes from Peter's neck of the woods. He grew up eating this. Peter Rosenberg, tell us about Biltong.
Absolutely a great preserved piece of meat, kind of very similar to beef jerky. The difference between jerky and Biltong is obviously flavoring, but predominantly how they are cured. And the jerky is like a heat oven dry, and the Biltong is a cured and hung air-dried, either with a little bit of wind, like from a fan, or out in the open in the air and just letting the wind blow through it and dry it out.
Excellent. Peter, tell us about about your experience, right? There are a lot of people today that if you say I'm from Rhodesia, right, they'll think it's somewhere outside of Albuquerque, right? But tell us about growing up in Rhodesia. This was a staple. This is part of something that you grew up with.
This absolutely is. So let's go back to a quick history on that. Biltong actually means buttocks. So anything from the round area is ideal. And the reason for that is the amount of fat, moisture, and the flavor off of it is great for this kind of cutting. Growing up in Africa, Biltong is kind of like a king, just the same way brisket is here in the U.S. So you go to your favorite brisket house, you go to your favorite butcher over there. They would cure it, dry it, hang it on clotheslines running across the back of the butchery, and you'd walk in there and pick them out, just like, I want one of those, and I want one of those, and they would say, do you want it cut or do you want to take it whole? Everybody has their own preference. Predominantly, just the flavoring on it is very, very simple. It's vinegar, salt, pepper, coriander, and that's it. That's the true main seasoning that goes on a Biltong.
Excellent. But before we really dive into Biltong at a deeper level, Diana, when we talk about these dried meats, whether it's a jerky, whether it's a Biltong, whether it's anything along those lines, like a lot of foods that we eat these days, it came out of an idea of food preservation, right? So meats wouldn't spoil. What's actually going on inside the meat as this stuff is being made?
So your goal here is to try to remove water. So you have different types of water within meat. Some of it's bound, some of it's immobilized, some of it's intracellular, some of it's outside those cells. And your goal is to try to remove as much water as you can, because that's what things grow with. Bacteria, molds, they can grow when they have access to that water. So if we remove it, then we don't have that chance of spoilage by having more of that bacteria growth. And so sometimes it's removing it through heat. Other times it's removing it through salt. I mean, even if you think of jerky, you're heavily salting that. This, you're going to be putting salt on it. You also have that acid too that's helping break down some of that cell structure and remove that moisture. And that's your overall goal. And the more moisture loss you have, the more shelf stable that product will be, and the less bacterial growth chances that you'll have too.
So it'll last a whole lot. What? Okay, meat scientist. What's the shelf life on on something like this?
So Chef Peter's actually, we've tested this. We have a water activity machine over at the Culinary Center, and this actually gets down to about 0.65 in terms of water activity. Fresh mussel is usually around 0.98, 0.99. It's pretty high up there. Once you get below the threshold, I think it's a 0.72. You are good. I mean, you're set. You can be shelf stable. I think the USDA guidelines still recommend probably about a year or 2 years just to be safe, but really it can last for a very long time.
What is it? Our pals up in Cleveland at Larder, Jeremy and Mansky, on some of their stuff, they'll just put like use in 7 years.
I mean, it's like Twinkies. Those things last forever, right?
Right. They will survive the apocalypse. Chef Tony, man, give us your take on Biltong, right? Why is this so hip, right? I mean, Peter's been eating this stuff for the last, 30, 40 years, right? Why all of a sudden is this on people's radar?
Well, Peter actually brought this to my attention about 5 years ago, and he was explaining it to me, and it sounded so good. And I was walking in one of our local grocery stores, turned to my left, and I couldn't believe it was on the shelf. It was Biltong, and I brought a pack and I gave it to him, and I said, "Hey, you've created a monster here, right? Because what we do at Certified Angus Beef is we create new ideas for you out there, you chefs and scientists." So he went back to the lab. We started playing around with it. I said, "Hey, Peter, why don't you come up with your favorite one?" He created a Indian lime pickle, Biltong, which was epic. I mean, unbelievable. So it's one of these trendy things, trendy food, trends that, if you look at it, this is great bar food. I would eat this with a couple of beers, maybe a couple, 3 or 4 beers with this. And you just have a knife, a cutting board, and you cut small pieces. Hey, let's try this, because I think you got one here, Peter. What is this flavor profile?
That one is the pure original, which just got coriander, salt, pepper, vinegar.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And the beauty of it with the salt, I mean, if you bar food, you're just going to buy more drinks.
Exactly.
It's
right?
going to be a good night.
It's a hook.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I notice as we look at this, and of course, speaking as somebody who is, I'm sort of your average, just kind of meathead guy who just eats a lot of food, but I can't tell you a whole lot about it. I look at this at first glance, it looks a bit like jerky, but there's a fat cap on this.
The fat cap on it is actually the best part of the dish. It gives it a little bit of moisture, and that's why the round cuts are so good, because it has a really thin fat outer cut on it. Just about every one that you use, every cut from the round is going to have a little bit of that fat. So that fat adds flavor, adds moisture, brings a little bit of juice back, because you've got a dehydrated piece of beef. And so that's what that is. The other fun thing about this, as you just mentioned, is bar food. In Africa, they would have these in jars behind the bar. You would select which one you wanted. They handed it to you. You sat there, you drank a beer, and you had your little pocket knife, and you sat there and you just whittled piece after piece after piece, and you just sat there and talked. So it's a social cut.
Yeah.
You'd cut a piece for your friend. You'd cut it, maybe not for your friend. Maybe just keep it all for yourself. I don't know.
and if so they do. If a bar fight erupts, I mean, you're armed, right? Right. You got your protection on you.
Yeah, that.
So if you could, Peter, Tony, walk us through this. You've already mentioned cuts from the round. You mentioned cuts that are near the H bone, right, towards the back of the animal, are great for it. Walk us through the method that you go to, first to make this in general, but two, I mean, it kind of sounds like the sky's the limit. You're only limited by your own creativity in terms of what you can make this reflect in the way of taste.
So simply, what you're doing is you are trimming the outer surface so that it's nice and clean. There's no connective tissue, and that's the great thing about the round. It is solid beef, whichever cut you go to. So then you're going to cut it into about a half, 3/4 inch to an inch thick, depending on how long you want it to take to cure. The thinner you cut it, the faster it will cure. This particular batch that you're looking at over here on Friday afternoon, poured some vinegar on top of it, seasoned with the salt, pepper, coriander, hung it up to dry in a little. When I hang it up to dry, I use a like a curing box, but you can put it into your oven, hang it on the racks without the oven on. Just totally let it hang and drip down, straight down, with maybe a little bit of a fan in the beginning just to dry it off so that it becomes dry, and then just shut it off. And by Monday morning, so that was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, this was the end product. And it will continue to dehydrate as it sits a long time. And you talked about just how long can you keep a piece. I accidentally found a piece about 25 years later in a box that ate pretty good. So, Jeremy, if you're listening out there, buddy, I have something that lasts longer than 7 years.
It's a college graduate by that time, right? You know, Tony, Diana, guys, we're talking about round cuts, right? And you know, what the politically correct term, I guess, when you're in the meat industry is these are things that are less tender. These are things that, you know, average Joes probably are going to struggle with, right? I mean, you can low and slow it, but there's not a whole lot of fat content in there. When you see cuts from the round being used for applications like this or other applications, I mean, what does that make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside?
I'd say yes. And I mean, when you're working with certified Angus beef, especially, the amount of marbling that's in that round cut is phenomenal, regardless if it's top round, bottom round, eye round, knuckle, or heel too. Okay. Any cut that you get from the round, really, when you have enough marbling in it, is fantastic. It's knowing how to cook it correctly, which these chefs do phenomenal work with that. And then on top of that, carving it correctly too. So just making sure you're slicing it against the grain. And even this, I mean, Peter's slicing it with the grain. You could use a knife to take into this, but I mean, I just bite a piece off, and it's still fairly tender. It's not. It's a great use for these cuts. But knowing that you still are going to have the benefits of certified Angus beef, that marbling that's within there. Peter talked about having the fat cap to have some of that juiciness, but this meat's going to have that fat dispersed throughout, even though it's from the round. I mean, that's the cool part about our brand, our beef.
Excellent. You know, I want to go a step farther into, you know, the culture behind this and the dishes. But Tony, walk us through, you know, especially in this day and age where a lot of restaurants are in, you know, the most difficult year that they've probably ever faced. Tell me about the economics behind this. You're taking a cut that is pretty inexpensive on the front end. You can turn this, or you can make some money here, right?
It really is. As a matter of fact, Peter and I just came from our alma mater, this Culinary Institute of America, and on our way up there, we went to a little place called the Bar Bill Restaurant, who, by the way, has the best chicken wings in Buffalo, but also they specialize in a beef on wick, which actually Peter did 2 years ago at one of our food service leaders conferences. It was the hit of the show. So it's a rare roast beef from the round, top round, or the eye round, served rare, with beautiful horseradish sauce. But the roll is kind of a Kimmelwick roll, an old German recipe with sea salt and caraway seeds. So they sell this sandwich for about $10.50, right? For about 6 ounces of roast beef. One of the loss leaders that we used to do when I worked in the hotel business with Hyatt Hotels, and Peter has done this as well, is a steamship round. You could go to any Sunday brunch, high-end Sunday brunch around the country, and what is the carving item? It is a steamship round, and you could serve 150 people to 200 folks, depending on the size and how that person cut it. And back then, I think I was paying $1.75 a pound. Now, that bone is probably about 3 feet long in size. I would bring that home to Oscar, and I wouldn't see Oscar for the next 3 days. So what does that tell you?
Continuing on with the idea of the economics, right? I mean, the markup on this by putting a little bit of labor into it is pretty immense, right?
It is absolutely fantastic. When you look at the raw cost of the round cuts, you're in the $2 to $3 range a pound. By the time you have processed it, dehydrated it, and cut it, packaged it, and shipped it, you're looking at about $35 a pound.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And, I mean, you're looking at portion sizes that are four ounces, maybe?
4 ounces. And if you do the math on 4 ounces, you look at yourself and say, wow, that's That's a score.
Yeah. And this has a fat cap on it, you know. You know, there is like this little cult. And I don't even know if it's a little cult, but there are people who are hardcore about jerky, right? If you drive up I-75 through Michigan, right? Every roadside stand has like a Michigan made, and it's like $35 for like 8 ounces of jerky. It's amazing. But obviously people are buying it because they're all still doing their thing.
Oh, and I mean, like Tony was saying, you go to a retail store now, I am amazed with how many different options there are for Biltong. And when Peter brought this up 5 years ago, nothing. Like there was nothing. And now it's just exploded because I think people have realized that this is something that, I mean, you could definitely do in-house and you could make a good money off of it.
Yeah. One of the things, and we talked initially about the fact that Biltong is one of those things that is on all these trends lists for 2020. If you go back and look the last couple of years, this idea of ancient grains has been out there. Tony, you've spent a lot of time with ancient grains, but really if you think about between Biltong, between some other dishes, it really all kind of traces back, as quite honestly does what seems to be a lot of humanity, back to Africa, right? Back to some of those African nations. Can you talk about, I guess, you know, let's broaden that a little bit and talk about old school African cuisine, dishes like this.
I'm going to let Peter talk about this dish, but you know, we all learn from each other, and when you stop learning, you just don't go anywhere. And he always comes up with these surprises. And so we did a hind shank, which we always do. We braised it, and he said, "Do you want to take sudsa?" I go, "What is sudsa?" Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Well, that's an African grain. Kind of like grits. It's from corn. So, Chef, why don't you explain the dish, how it's made, and how it's eaten by the folks in South Africa?
I'd love to. Sudza, or it's kind of like a corn meal, and it's called maize meal in Africa, is a very fine powdered grit, almost like flour. Water, salt, stir that in, and you get a mixture that is malleable, so you can pick it up with your hands and dip it in a gravy and add a piece of meat to it and kind of eat it. And now it's known as, it's an African staple. This is like every meal in Africa where the Africans will congregate, and it's what we talk about is communal, and it's fun. You're sitting around you gathering, you eating, you talking, you having fun, and everybody's dipping in, grabbing a little bit and tasting it. It doesn't have a lot of flavor, but whatever the sauces are that are made with that, like the hind shank where it's braised and you got all those nice juices and flavors, this soaks that up.
Yeah.
And it is killer. And we're just itching for the right group to come in here for us to be able to put this out as a family-style meal after COVID settles down.
Amen. Amen. Oh, amen. You know, there's something to be said about that, and Chef Gavin made a beef Wellington last week that I got to feast, and you know, don't underestimate the power of either, you know, like a beef en croûte or something where if you can like soak up those beef juices, if it's in corn, if it's in a bread, if it's, holy cow, man. I mean, that's
a topic in itself.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, before I was a meat scientist, I knew that stuff was good.
Yeah.
I mean, I would look for it on the plate. Come on, that's easy.
Au jus, right?
Yes.
I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, barbecue folks call that the mop, right? And
Yeah,
you're coming with
the mop.
Peter, you have been in America. I mean, first, before we move on, tell us about your story. It's not very often that we get somebody from Rhodesia, right? I mean, the country's not even around anymore, right? I mean, it's been renamed. Tell us about you and your journey from Rhodesia to Worcester, Ohio, with us. It's been quite the interesting ride.
It's been great, and I wouldn't change a thing. Leaving Rhodesia, I went to South Africa, got an apprenticeship in a hotel, wanted to see the world, and saw an opportunity to go to the Culinary Institute of America and actually get my culinary degree over there, which is where Chef Tony and I were a couple of weeks ago. What a fantastic school. Gave me a passport to the world. Always wanted to travel as a young chef, and as it continued, I saw that this was a passport to the world. And just over the years, I've had such great opportunities to cook for presidents, Queen Elizabeth, tons of movie stars, work in 5-star hotels, meet gazillion people. This is the most social industry you're ever going to come across. The best thing about it, your customers become your friends, and it's a lifetime relationship. You can call back on anybody anytime, and it's like you never left.
Yeah. And I'll add to it, since you didn't go there, you got to escort the ducks at the Peabody, right?
I sure did, yeah. In fact, I had to leave the Peabody Hotel because I was itching to cook duck, and that just would not have gone over well.
Oh, on that note, we appreciate you tuning in to the Meat Speak podcast powered by the certified Angus beef brand. If this is your first time tuning in, please know that you can find us across all of your major podcasting platforms. That includes Apple, Google Play, Spotify, or simply by visiting us at certifiedangusbeef.com/podcast, or I'll embrace my inner millennial. Give us a follow on the Instagram, meat_speak. Slide into our DMs. Tell Chef Tony his beard's looking extra nice today.
Well, thank you.
Very nice, very nice.
Thank you.
And on that note, Chef Peter Rosenberg, Chef Tony Biggs, meat scientist Dinah Clark. Guys, thanks for hanging out today.
It's been fun.
Bye-bye.
This biltong is not going to eat itself, right?
It's going to stay right here with you.
This is why I do this job. Till next time. See you later.